everybody, and welcome to this week's edition of This Woman Can. My guest this week is fluent in several languages. I struggle with just one, maybe a little bit of two. But Gennike Mayers is a language acrobat, and it's been her life's passion and privilege to apply foreign languages in everyday life as she helps individuals confronted with language barriers to cross over from the quicksand of confusion to the promised land of clarity and comprehension. Hailing from Trinidad and Tobago, Gennikes has soared through much of the Caribbean, Latin America, Africa and Asia, working primarily in humanitarian assistance and international development. And with a background in foreign languages, communications, journalism, international relations and diplomacy, she has made a career out of doing what she loves and loving what she does. She's also a newly minted author, having released the book CARICOM, Good Offices, Good Neighbours. And today we talk to her about her career journey and, more importantly, her career pivot. So Gennike, welcome to This Woman Can.
Thank you, Jan. It's great to be here chatting with you.
Thank you. So great to have you with us. So Gennike, can you tell us a little bit about your journey and how you got to where you are today?
So in a nutshell, I'd go back to high school and I'd say that, because that's a critical period for just about everyone. You know, you've got that, particularly in the Caribbean, at some point you have to choose subjects and that pretty much dictates your trajectory for the rest of your life. And you get to make this ever important choice at around the age of 14 or 15. And so at that age, not really knowing very much and being led by sort of the career guidance counselors and so forth, I pretty much just went with what I was good at. And that was languages. So that was what sort of dictated my path thereafter. And I found very early on in learning languages at school and then at university that this language thing could really open some doors for me. And so I almost became obsessed with languages. Of course, English being my native tongue, and having learned French and Spanish at high school, that's what was offered at the time. But then I had the opportunity in university to interact with Creole speakers, Portuguese speakers, speakers of other languages. And that was one of the, I would say, you know, you spoke about pivotal moments.
Yes.
At the University of the West Indies in St. Augustine, while I had not left my country, I was being exposed to persons who were speaking other languages. And I felt like this really is an eye-opener, could open some doors right within the Caribbean region. And so at that point, I also thought, okay, I need to learn some other languages while sort of focusing and mastering the languages of the region, primarily English, Spanish, and French. I would stick a pin in there just to say that between high school and university, because most people tend to go straight on to university, I had the opportunity in between to take a break and actually start working. So I started working at age 17 in the field of journalism. I was a trainee journalist. And that was really an instrumental moment because, one, I couldn't afford to go to university. Most of my classmates had got scholarships. They went abroad to the US or the UK on scholarships to study. And I literally was left behind, left alone, not quite knowing what to do. And at the same time, this job opportunity came up. It was like an incubator for journalists led by Dale Colasing and Ed Fung at the time of AVM fame. I'm talking about the 1990s here. But that was a really important moment for me because I was exposed to the world of work and through none other than journalism, which really is an eye-opener for a 17-year-old. And in the midst of that experience, there was one defining moment where there was a trade mission from Martinique that came to Trinidad and Tobago. And I had the opportunity to meet with them. And when I spoke with them in French, literally their jaws dropped because they were not expecting in this room that there'd be anyone who could speak to them in French outside of their group. And so there was I, young trainee journalist, speaking to them in French and interviewing these executives. And again, I realized in that moment that language opens doors. Language can open so many opportunities. And so I stayed in touch with them, went on to university, went on to exchange programs that were afforded by the University of the West Indies. And when I finally set foot into a French-speaking country for the first time, it was as if I had come home. That's how I felt.
Right, right.
Because I had been living, dreaming, breathing French even before I stepped foot into Martinique. That was my very first stop. And so when I say that it's been my life's passion of doing what I love and loving what I do, that has been the case all around, whether it is in the studies, my academic pursuits, or work, or writing, or whatever have you. I literally have had that privilege to do what I love what I do, and that this has been able to afford me a living.
Fabulous, fabulous. And that's taken you into diplomatic fields, if I remember from your bio. But you've recently done a career transition or career pivot. So could you tell us a little bit about what your reinvention entails and what it's all about and what prompted that?
So I would say that pretty much every year, Janice, I reinvent myself. And I think it's a function of my personality, but also, let me just put it frankly, I've tried just about every job that was open to me. And I found that very quickly, either I got bored, and so I could not just stay with a job because it paid the bills. I had to have something more. And the other thing that happened too is, again, because of my nature, I tend to be very frank, very outspoken, and I call a spade a spade.
Yeah.
You know about that. You know something about that. And when you're in an organization, regardless of the organization, people with this kind of character, personality are not always well appreciated.
Yeah.
And so I kept getting into trouble in the sense of wanting to be the change that I wanted to see in the organizations where I work. Because if something was going wrong, I felt, okay, if we identify a problem, let's identify the solution. That's not always very welcome. Yeah. And so got into trouble a few times, and I just opted to leave most of the time until last year, again, performing in a very fulfilling role. I was working in Zimbabwe, enjoying the job, but circumstances being what they were, and several personal circumstances, let's put it that way, I felt that I had to leave and just come right back home in the midst of the COVID pandemic. So my pivot, so to speak, took place on different levels. Right. I physically left Africa to come back to the Caribbean. Yeah. Trinidad and Tobago's borders are still closed. So, deciding to come home in the midst of a pandemic with closed borders, having to navigate travel exemptions, etc., 5 or 6 PCR tests along the way.
Very expensive too.
Well, luckily, most of them were free, but it was probably, looking from a logical, rational perspective, it might not have been the best time to make that decision to leave the job, leave a continent, come back home with no set plan. But literally along the physical journey, because it took me 3 months to get home, since the borders were closed and I was waiting to get word on when could I come back, and I was kind of island hopping in between, trying to get nearer to Trinidad. And that physical journey gave me the time to think about what happens next. And while island hopping and sort of reconnecting with persons that I knew, places where I had lived before, friends who opened up their doors to me to come spend time with them until I could figure my way out back home, I realized that my side hustle for many years, which was interpreting, I had trained as an interpreter and I worked maybe 10 days a year as an interpreter back in the days. And I realized, look, this side hustle thing, this is a talent, this is a skill. this can be my mainstay. And so I started putting things in place before I got home to be able to activate a business in interpreting, which is where Interpreting Your Needs was born. And so by the time I got back to Tobago, Trinidad and Tobago, I was able to reconnect with former clients, let everybody know, hey, I'm back in town. Yeah. And I have to say, in the context of COVID-19, I have to be thankful because COVID-19 having pushed companies to go online, the technologies available for interpreting also went online in a big way. And so whereas before, when I did function as an interpreter, I would have to hop on a plane and go somewhere. That was enjoyable too. But in this new scenario, I could work from home, from the comfort of my little office, using the technology that's available online. And there's so many multilingual meeting platforms now that I can work online, work with colleagues remotely who are in other countries, for clients who are in other countries, and do what I love, spend time with my dogs, and pay the bills at the same time. So that essentially has been my transition, coming back home and establishing myself fully as CEO of Interpreting Your Needs.
Excellent. Now, you would probably see me just taking some notes because I didn't want to miss some of the points you had raised. I just wanted to kind of dig a little bit deeper in those. Now, the one thing you said about you getting into trouble, by being strong. Now, for me, that's an assertive woman. And that's all good in my book. So in those scenarios, because I think there's a lot of women probably facing that as well. And I did a whole piece not so long ago about, assertion versus aggression, because people misconstrue the two. So when you're being assertive, or you're being, I suppose, getting the pushback because you're being assertive, how do you handle that?
So this is a wonderful Pandora's box that you've opened up. And I've learned so much about myself along the way, but also interpersonal skills.
Yeah.
And what I found really useful, and of course I'm being very cheeky when I say I got into trouble. Most times what happened is I detected the trouble that was there and I exposed it. Yeah. But whereas I'm the kind of person who has no trouble with dealing with problems head on, a lot of people tend to just want to ignore it, pretend that it's not there, and move on along. So, I say it being very cheeky. But what I have found useful, particularly as a manager supervising persons, and in some instances supervising persons who were older than I was, who might have been definitely more senior in the organization than I was, because most of the time, of course, if I leave after a year, I never stay long enough to become senior in the hierarchy. But I found it really useful to engage directly with the persons who I had difficulties with. And I hasten to say that in the Caribbean, I don't know if it's a cultural thing, but these corridor conversations, they don't work out here. That's what I found. That quickly turns into gossip. It quickly turns into what we call in Trinidad, we call mauvais langue. That's from the French term mauvaise langue, bad tongue. And that's not constructive. Right. But it seems to be the norm. And so what I found very useful was to really, chat one-on-one with the persons who I had identified a problem with, before I even go, let's say, to the level of the directorate to point out that, hey, there's an issue that I'm having trouble with and I can't navigate it on my own. I need some help. Yeah. I really prefer to deal one-on-one with people. And again, maybe people aren't used to having that one-on-one discussion, because it really takes looking somebody straight in the eyes and telling them something that they don't want to hear. Yeah. And it also takes humility to put yourself in a position where, having said these things, you also have to listen to the reaction that's going to come at you.
Very much, very much.
It's like kicking the proverbial ant's nest or the bachak nest, and you know how those ants run crazy when you kick it. So, that's been pretty much my life. And I have been through several mediation processes, because after I engage one-on-one with person, if that doesn't work, I'm also not the type to back down. And that could be, it could be a strength of character. It could be a character flaw, however you want to look at it. But because I don't back down, it means that once I've engaged that process, I'm going to go jusqu'au bout, right to the end.
Right.
So if that means escalating it to mediation or to whatever formal complaint, or dealing with, staff members who might be unionized or whatever, I'm prepared to go the full length, because I'm also the kind of person who thinks, like, if I can't bring change and if I can't live with what's happening in my environment, then it's up to me to exit.
Right.
So I will first try to bring the change.
Yeah.
And if that doesn't come along, then I'm not going to stick around, and that's fine. That's fine. So there's the whole mediation, and of course that looks different depending on the organization. Some organizations have a very formal mediation process. Because I worked with international organizations, there are many different layers. You might have like a local layer, you may have a regional layer to that mediation process, and then you may have to go all the way to headquarters, and the headquarters are somewhere, usually in Geneva or somewhere in Europe. And that can cause some destabilization.
Right.
And so you have to look at it from not just the individual perspective, because then it's a whole organization that's now involved in this mediation process. And that has taught me diplomacy before I even studied diplomacy. Just to transition to another point that you made. So, I was studying for a master's in diplomacy after having worked to some extent in humanitarian diplomacy. Right. So there's a bridge between communications, so humanitarian communications, but in contexts where you are dealing with governments, you're dealing with government agencies and international development agencies. And so there's a fine line between communications and humanitarian diplomacy. So that was the perspective that I was looking at it from. And having had a taste of humanitarian diplomacy, I wanted to really dig a bit deeper into the theory behind it and get equipped to be able to negotiate if needed. Certain situations that were happening. For example, when I worked in Bangladesh, it's a humanitarian crisis, but it's highly political, because you're dealing with the community, the Rohingya community, who fled their home country, Myanmar, fled violence because the violence was being exacted by government forces, and to another country where they were welcomed, but the welcome was kind of overstayed. And then you have all of these international agencies and foreign sovereign governments trying to tell Bangladesh what to do. Yeah. And so just being in the midst of that context and seeing how it played out in the refugee camps, I really wanted to equip myself to be able to negotiate a scenario like that if it became necessary one day. Right. And so that led me into the field of diplomacy. But coming back to our region, Caribbean region, and we're literally on the 4th of July, we just celebrated CARICOM's anniversary. We have such a dynamic region with all of these sovereign states playing together in the Caribbean community. And then from time to time, you have some hiccups where there's a CARICOM position, but then you have some CARICOM member states who, they take their own position. Right. And so I was also intrigued by what was happening at home. And this leads me just to flag that actually was is the topic of my book. It was my dissertation for my master's thesis, and the dissertation became a book, which looks at CARICOM's diplomacy with regard to the Venezuelan crisis, yet another crisis happening in the region. So that's kind of the world tour of the fluency and how I got into that.
And you're right about people not wanting to face those difficult conversations. I do a lot around that, about, you know, the fearful and all the reasons they tell themselves as to why they shouldn't have those conversations. So I totally understand there with you. Now, the couple of things you just said as well was that the one thing I'm finding a lot with women now, and you said it, was what's next. So for what I see is that the COVID, the pandemic, whatever the situation, has allowed a lot of women, some degree, to maybe not slow down per se if they've got children and family, but to be out of the environment where there's a constant onslaught of what they're thinking about their career, about their thoughts. And they look at their career and they say, is this it? What's next? So I really like the fact that you picked up on that as well. And then lastly, the other thing, can you describe to me, I think you said it, was that you saw this whole situation as an opportunity. That's what I heard. At least that's what I heard. So what made you realize there was an opportunity in this whole pandemic, where maybe a lot of people are going, oh, woe is me, and everything's falling, chicken licking, and the whole sky is falling?
And Janice, you know, I acknowledge, let me start by acknowledging that this pandemic has been rough and tumble for a lot of people. I mean, people have lost loved ones, have lost jobs, have lost their homes, have lost so much. And I want to acknowledge that. I know a few people, not in my close circle, but, you know, who have passed on during the pandemic. That being said, one thing is that I don't like to say I had no choice, because we always have a choice.
Yes.
At the time when I was preparing to leave Zimbabwe, I felt that this was the only choice that I could make. It seemed completely irrational, you know, to my parents and
as always.
Yeah. Why am I leaving a stable job in a country that I like, doing what I like? Why am I leaving all of that behind to come home to do what? And because I had no plan at the time. That sounded crazy, you know. But in the back of my mind, I just said, like, you know, something is gonna work out. Now, I identify as Christian. I believe in God, and so I do have this cushion of faith that I sit on. That, you know, sometimes it makes me lose touch with the visible reality around me. Right. Because I see further, I see more, and I see within. Right. And sometimes that does not really line up with what's happening in the environment. And so I came home it's a very chaotic environment. Everything on the outside looked like, as you said, the sky was falling. But on the inside, I felt, wow, there is so much I can do. I had started doing my research about, you know, the online technologies available for interpreting. I started doing some brief courses. This is in the midst of writing my dissertation for the master's, which had become irrelevant in my life, you know, in the scheme of choices that I was making. But I was doing these online courses, getting trained up in using some of these remote, what we call remote simultaneous interpreting, RSI platforms. And I was, you know, already getting feelers for former clients. And so I started, in the midst of the chaos, in the midst of, you know, not knowing what was going on, uncertainty, I started just building a brand, to put it nicely. And then the name, you know, Interpreting Your Needs, sort of solidified it, that it's not just about interpreting services or translation with the foreign languages, but it is, on a deeper level, interpreting the needs of my clients, and finding the appropriate solutions to their needs. And that could be a range of things. So that was really critical. And then by the time I came home, because of the scenario here in Trinidad and Tobago, with a huge influx of Venezuelan migrants coming in, and people, well, agencies, I should say, finally being a lot more sensitive to the fact that our population, our local population, is essentially English speaking, and not a lot of people had taken the opportunity to pursue foreign languages. Although Spanish has been mandatory in our education system for years, but most people, they learn Spanish up in high school and then they drop it like a hot potato because they never had the opportunities to make it make sense.
Yeah.
And so I came home at a time where there was this greater sensitivity and awareness of the need for foreign languages to be able to communicate, at least with the migrant population that we're hosting in Trinidad and Tobago. But also because of this humanitarian crisis happening here at home, you had other international agencies coming in to respond to this crisis, to support the government with this crisis. And with that international layer, again, a sort of recognition, if you like, that languages bridge barriers. And so there is now, if you look at, I'm not looking for jobs anymore, but when I do see job announcements, pretty much they're all asking for bilingual English, Spanish, and French is an asset. So that has changed even recruitment in the country. And so I highlight that to explain to you the context that has changed locally. There is a much greater awareness for the role of foreign languages and how they can be used in business, in development, in policy, in diplomacy, in integration, even CARICOM integration, because Haiti is a member of CARICOM. Haiti is French speaking. And so whenever CARICOM meets, there's got to be interpreters there. I've interpreted for a few CARICOM meetings. And so there really is this sort of burgeoning sense of opportunity for persons who have embraced foreign languages.
Excellent, excellent. So we talked about you pivoting and changing career. What do you think has been the most challenging aspect of making that change?
Well, for me, hands down, it's structure. I tend to be, more of the creative, go with the flow type. Not a heavy planner, although, in previous incarnations, in previous jobs, I have had to, be a very strict planner. And I guess part of reinventing myself was that I wanted to leave certain aspects of the job, those previous jobs behind that I didn't necessarily like. But now I have to re-embrace them because as a CEO, you have to do everything, as you know, Janice. So I'm not just the interpreter, I'm not just the translator. I am the salesperson. I am the accountant. I am, well, not the lawyer, but I get advice for that. But I'm the chief cook and bottle washer. Enjoying it, but it does mean that I have had to be more rigorous with myself. And put structures and systems in place to be able to manage a business, because this is not it's not a not-for-profit. So that's been the most difficult part for me. But thankfully, again, in the environment that we're evolving in, with virtual assistants and remote assistants, you can pretty much find all the services that you need for your business online. And there are wonderful communities like LinkedIn, where I met you for the first time, where there's great networking that's going on, and so we can identify persons who can provide skills that I need, that I just don't know how to do or just don't care to do. It's fairly easy to identify those resources and hire them as needed.
And the good thing about that, I think, what I'm hearing from you saying there is that it's knowing when to ask for the help you need. Because so many of us go through having to be this strong woman persona type, that we have to do it all, we can do everything, we're superwoman, that we're hesitant to ask or recognize that actually somebody can do it better.
Much better
for us. And if we really look at it, is my time, spending all my time trying to decipher this one little bit, my time is expensive. Is it worth being spent doing that one particular aspect when somebody can do it much quicker and better than me? You know, so it's having the confidence in yourself to know when you need to ask for the help you need. And I think that's
absolutely.
I think that's a big.
I couldn't put it any better. That's so true. No, but it's so true. And I think it's a skill you have to have when you enter into entrepreneurship, because you can't do it all. You really can't. Or you do it, or you do some of it poorly, and then it affects your brand. So, the wise decision is to surround yourself with even wiser people. Who are experts in their field and who can get the job done.
Because I always say that a good leader knows the questions to ask. A great leader knows who to ask, because you don't have to do it all yourself. So that's been a bit of a mantra that's got me through my career. But Gennike, share with us a success quote or a mantra that you use and that's been meaningful to you, and why.
Well, one, I'd say success is what, how you define it. But the quote that defines my business, really, it's attributed to Nelson Mandela. And he said, if you speak to a man in a language he understands, it goes to his head. But if you speak to a man in his own language, it goes to his heart. And that is something that I've experienced time and time and time again. So yes, my business is based on offering language services, but quite apart from my business, I have been able to connect with people across the globe in the strangest of circumstances, quite sincerely, just because I speak their language. And sometimes it's not even that I master their language. I was living in Zimbabwe. I picked up a few words here and there. I don't speak the language. I just know a few words. And, I would almost, as mocking myself, I would just say those few words on any occasion. I don't know what the person is telling me. I can't understand what they're saying to me, but I'm going to smile at them and say, Mangwana ni, shap, shap. And they just, they burst forth just smiling, because what I said makes no sense at all, but it's their language. It's irrelevant to the scenario. But I'm a foreigner who is able to speak a few of their words, and they take that as a sign of respect. And that immediately breaks barriers. So if you go into the market, you go shopping, trying to negotiate with street vendors or whatever have you. Though most of them speak English. They're in the case of Zimbabwe, they're a highly educated population. Mostly everyone speaks English. But when you engage with them in their language, there's a shift in the atmosphere. It becomes, it's a totally different conversation. And that is the thing that I absolutely love, that I can land in a place where I do not speak the language of the country, of the people. I might pick up a few little words, but I'm able to engage and build that bridge of trust. That they treat me and they treat with me very differently.
And from that,
and that's what success looks like.
Yes, but the fact is, the reason why people are so receptive is that, yes, you don't know the language, but you've taken time to try, and you haven't. And too many times we see people. You're in a tourist country. I'm in a tourist country, and so many times, people will go to other countries and expect them to know their language, without taking the time to know, hang on, you've come to a foreign country. Why haven't you at least attempted, or at least to put a phone translator on your phone to at least try and make that effort? It's a simple things. And like you said, it's that sign of respect that you care enough about us to actually take a genuine interest in who we are. So I love that. So we're coming down to our last few questions, Gennike. So let me ask you, if you could choose your own mentor, who would it be and why?
Ooh. So I have a mentor.
Right.
Matter of fact, I should say I have several mentors, but for different areas of my life. But I think in terms of maybe taking the next step, what I see as my next step, I've set for myself this year target of going global.
Okay.
Going global from my home. I'm already doing that on a limited scale, but I think the mentor who is probably going to be able to really take me there, or guide me there, is a lady by the name of Marshawn Evans Daniels. She's a faith-based coach, she and her husband. And I've done a short course with them already, but I really, I yearn for a deeper mentorship relationship.
Right.
Because I see her as being someone who walks the talk, and she and her husband, and they work as a team, and that's another area of mentorship that I'm interested in. I'm single, with children, I got dogs, but what I love about what I know of them as a couple is how they inspire couples to support each other in business. Because, and this is speaking to you, I guess, you know, when one of the couple is an entrepreneur, the whole couple is an entrepreneur. You know, there has to be that support base.
In our family right now, we're both entrepreneurs now. Since I transitioned out of corporate, we're both entrepreneurs. So we have to be able to support each other. And I hear what you're saying there.
So that's, for me, that's the next step. It's actually preparing myself for the next stage of my personal life, but recognizing that the relationship foundation has to be solid in order for the business to work. You know, so yeah, that's the next step for me, I would say.
Very true. Thank you. I love that. I love that. And what are the 3 things do you think you've learned about yourself during your career?
I have learned what elastic means.
Okay.
I have been forced to stretch myself beyond what I thought possible. And I say it with a huge smile because I think I'm already a very flexible person who takes, you know, calculated risks.
Yeah.
But I have learned, and particularly over the last year, how elastic I am, how flexible I am to be able to literally roll, you know, take the punches, roll. As we say, you know, in the Caribbean, is drop, cover, roll.
Drop, cover, hold on.
Drop, cover, hold on, because we've got so many natural disasters in our region.
Yes.
Not too many in Trinidad and Tobago, but that is something that is real for me in the business journey, just being able to roll with it. Another thing to, I've rediscovered, I would say, that it's a good thing to be led by your heart and by your instinct. Sometimes we attempt to make rational decisions when actually what's being called for, it's a heart and an instinct decision. And, you know, at different stages of my career, I was doubting my instincts.
Yes.
I was doubting the state of my heart on certain matters. But now I feel like, you know, my mind has to be in harmony with my heart for the decision to be right. And not the other way around.
Yes.
So that's, and I think that ties into confidence in the sense that if you're confident in the experiences that you've had and you're confident that you've learned the lessons from the worst of those experiences, then that confidence can pretty much steer you in the right direction when you have difficult decisions to make. So that's what I've learned, essentially.
Fabulous. Now I'm going to ask this next question. In my mind, I think I know the answer, but I'm not going to say it. So where would we find you on a Saturday morning at 10 a.m.?
In the garden. In my garden. Whether it's raining, whether it's sunny, that's my therapy. And now that I have the privilege of working from home, if I want to go to the garden at Monday morning at 8 o'clock or 6 o'clock, that's where I'll be as well. But I try to reserve my one day of the weekend, either Saturday or Sunday, for the whole day.
Right.
Just weeding and talking to the plants and, picking fruits, and that's it.
Has that been a
Was
exactly what I thought it was. So having followed you on LinkedIn, it's exactly what I thought it was. But has that been a newfound thing as a result of the pandemic, or has that been something that you were always interested in?
So it's actually a generational thing. On both sides of my family, the women have always nurtured their gardens, and for me, it manifested now because I actually have a stable home. Because I've been traveling for so many years for work and living in apartments or hotels or in tents, I never had a garden. I never had a fixed home until I moved back home last year. And so home really became my all, as in I took possession of the place, the garden, the whole property, and that's where the generational talent has come out, and I'm so happy that I have the time and I have the space to do it.
Yeah. I call it, I must admit, I even though I dabbled with gardening over the years, and even as a child, my mom would garden by proxy, where she'd make us do all the weeding and kind of direct us where we need to be. But over the past, now I've had the time, it's my happy place. I have to say, it's the place I'm happiest. And every morning, pretty much without fail, you'll find me in there. I give myself a cut-off time that I have to start work. So, Gennike, if there was one piece of advice you could share with women who are considering reinventing their careers, transitioning, pivoting, whatever you wish to call it, what would that be?
So granted, we're all very different, and I know people look first at their circumstances, particularly women. If you're married, if you have children, that's a completely different scenario than someone like me who's, on my own. But I think one piece of advice that would speak to any woman is really to follow her instinct. I truly believe that was a special gift that God gave to us women, that instinct, and I would say follow it.
Excellent. Thank you so much for that. Thank you so much. So that was really, I suppose, really my final question. Apart from this last question, Gennike, it's been great talking to you. If people want to get to know more about what you do or connect with you, how can they do that?
So I quite like the LinkedIn platform, and that's where I am most active. So it's easy to just reach out to me there by direct message or just send me a connection request. You can also reach out through my website, interpretingyourneeds.com. And that's pretty much it. I mean, I have all the other paraphernalia, but I'm most faithful on LinkedIn. I think it's an excellent platform for interaction and networking, and I've met so many wonderful people there. So I'm looking forward to meeting new connections. Some of your followers who are listening to this today, looking forward to connecting with you.
Thank you. So Gennike, that was my last question. Thank you so much for joining me on This Woman Can this week. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for your leadership. I really enjoy, following your content on LinkedIn and hearing what's going on. It's I have nothing but praise for that platform. I find it, it's been a place that I've really, because I live in a very isolated area. There's no human beings around me for 2 kilometers. And where I meet people, that's where I see people. It's there or nowhere.
Thank you.
So I always look out for you there.
Excellent. And I'll be sure to put all the links in the show notes if people can connect with you themselves as well.
Thank you
once again.
Appreciate that.